To summarize then, ADHD has a lot of implications for its management when we shift to viewing it as executive function disorder. Number one, teaching knowledge is not enough. Stop teaching skills so much. Instead, you have to redesign the environment, the point of performance, to help them show what they know. I call this redesigning, putting scaffolding around the child, putting artificial things around them to help them to work that other children don't need at that point. Think of it as a prosthesis, an artificial device that we have to arrange for them. We have to restructure the tasks for someone with a younger executive age. We have to change the point of performance, right? And by changing the point of performance, we can help them to show what they know and get the work done. It may not get done the same way other children are able to do it, but they can get it done. But we're the ones who have to change first. And then we can help them change and succeed in situations where they aren't succeeding. Now, we need to keep in mind all of these executive deficits are neurological. They're not learned. They're not a choice. They're not something the child is just willfully doing. They're a neurological disability in that child's brain. And that comes largely from the genetics of brain development. So we're dealing with a neurogenetic disorder, a biological disorder. And you know, when you're dealing with a biological disorder, it's okay, it's all right, it's acceptable to use biological agents to change a biological disorder. If I have diabetes, I can take a medication to change my insulin levels. I have a biological disorder. I'm going to take a biological agent to change the biological problem. That's rational. It makes sense, right? So if ADHD is a biological disorder, then it makes sense that it's okay as part of our package of treatments that we use biological agents to help correct the problem. And that's what ADHD medications are. They're neurogenetic treatments. They're biological agents that enter the brain and alter the executive networks so that they can function closer to normal, sometimes even normally. And that means that using medication to treat ADHD is fine. It's satisfactory. It's acceptable. It's humane. It's rational. It's not something that we need to worry about or fret about that we're papering over a problem. We're not. It's okay. It's reasonable. After all, you would give insulin to a diabetic. You would give an epilepsy medication to a child with a seizure disorder. Why wouldn't you do that for somebody with ADHD as well? Now, parents often ask, can I train these executive functions so that if my child were to practice working memory, for instance, would their working memory get better? So far, we have not found that to be the case. And a number of people have tried very interesting games, apps, and other kinds of technology to try to train up these executive functions. And so far, it's not working very well. The children get good at playing the games, but that doesn't translate or transfer into improving their executive functioning in daily life. That's where things break down. So as tempting as it may be to use apps and games and smartphones and tablets and technology to practice brain training games in order to improve our memory and our inhibition, so far the research shows we have not succeeded at doing so. So despite the fact that there are between 300 and 1,000 apps on the market for ADHD right now, none of them have any evidence that they're effective at helping ADHD, I'm sorry to say. So the answer is no. We can't do it that way. And that applies to neurofeedback, EEG biofeedback, which is simply another way of trying to use games to train up the mental abilities of children. But in this case, we happen to use the electrical signals of the brain as a form of feedback. But that doesn't change the fact that they're still practicing on a game, trying to improve their brain. And as you would expect, it doesn't work. Other implications to think about, we need to be redesigning the environment. And this is where behavior modification comes in. And I'll have a lot to say about behavioral interventions in another lecture. We'll go into that in great detail. But behavioral treatments done in the natural environment by the parents and teachers and other caregivers who are there at the point of performance where the problems occur, that is how we do treatment. That is where psychological therapies work best, right? But you have to keep in mind, we're not doing this to teach knowledge. We're doing it to motivate the child to show what they know. So you cannot expect that because you do a behavior modification program for a few weeks that you can get rid of the program and pull back and go back to normal functioning, and the child's improvements will last. They won't. They'll go right back down again. The child depends on that scaffolding, that structure, that behavior modification plan in order to succeed. So think of it this way. There are two reasons we do behavior modification. To teach you things you don't know. That's knowledge. That's teaching skills. Right? That's what we do for autism and for learning disorders. But the second reason we do behavior modification is for motivation, to help you to remember and show what you know. And if you're doing BMod for that reason, you can't take away the program abruptly. You can gradually withdraw it over time, over years, but you can't get rid of it because the child has come to depend on that structure to help them show what they know. And if you pull the structure, you lose the gains that came from having that structure. So we need to keep that in mind. And we also need to know that if we intervene in one situation, it isn't going to transfer to another situation where there was no intervention. So if a parent is working with a child at home on their behavior, on their ADHD symptoms, it isn't going to change the school. And if a teacher is working at school in her math class with a child with ADHD, well, that's where the change is going to happen. She'll get the improvements. But it isn't going to change the home life of the child after school. They're not going to be any better. So we need to understand that treatments only work where and when we use them, and that we cannot eliminate them completely without losing all the gains that we got. So it's possible that if we practice and practice and practice doing these things at the point of performance, they might eventually become more automatic. I'm not saying that can't happen, but it takes a lot of time and practice to see that. It's not going to be simply a week or two of doing a treatment and then we can stop the treatment and the child will be better the rest of their life. That's not going to happen. But if we practice these things for tens and hundreds of times over time, every day, we may find that eventually it does become automatic and the child is able to do it without needing their executive brain. So the compassion and willingness of others to help the child at the point of performance is crucial to improving that ADHD child's behavior. So that really is the crux, the centerpiece of treatment. Do the people who live with this child care enough to help, to change these situations at home and school so the child can succeed? If they do, then it will work. And if they don't, it won't. And no amount of clinical motivation that I might have as a professional is going to correct for that fact. What matters is, do the people who care for the child care enough to help? So we need to look at ADHD like we look at diabetes. It's a chronic problem that we have to intervene with using multiple treatments every day in order to improve the child's capacity to control their behavior. Now, we'll talk in another lecture specifically about the things to do at the point of performance. But this theory, unlike any other theory of ADHD, tells us what is important that we have to do. Number one, we have to get rid of relying on these mental representations and make the information that is important to use physical at the point of performance. Another way of saying it is we have to offload working memory onto something else. We have to externalize the knowledge and put it in their visual field where they work. So we can do that with notes, lists, reminders, cues, anything physical where I can put the information that will remind you of what you have to do right here. That's what I need to rely on. Mental representations don't guide behavior, but if we put them in a physical form around the child, in their vision, it can. And that's a critical lesson from this theory. Okay? So we have to offload mental information onto physical storage devices around us. And then we have to externalize the most important key pieces of information. What do you need to know right here, right now, as to what you need to do? And that's what we need to put there around them. We know that their sense of time is damaged. It's dysfunctional. So we need to make time physical. We need to use clocks and timers and counters and other things around the child while they're working so they can see how much time they have left and know how much time they have to get something done. We can't rely on the internal clock of time to guide them. We have to break up long tasks into shorter units, smaller quotas, because this child has a delayed executive age. And so younger children can't do longer assignments the way older children are able to do. They can't organize themselves. They can't sustain their action. They can't engage in self-motivation the way the older child can do. So if ADHD results in a younger executive age, then we have to organize the task as we would for a much younger child. And breaking the task down into small quotas is one way of doing that. And then, of course, we have to organize the workspace so that what the child needs is where they need it, because the ADHD person can't self-organize very well. We have to help them do that. And because motivation is lacking, we have to add additional motivation into the task. We have to add in privileges and rewards and approval and praise and tokens and points and maybe money or food or privileges. But we have to find rewards to add into the task to help motivate them to do that work, because without it, they're not going to be able to sustain it. Another way of thinking of that is we have to make motivation external, right? And then lastly, as I said, the last executive function is mental play. And it begins with physical play in young childhood, and it eventually becomes internal play. And what we have to do is go backward in development. If we're going to help ADHD children with problem solving, we have to make the problem physical again. We have to take pieces of the problem and put it in their hands so that they can manipulate it in order to try to solve the problem. It's easy to think of this through mental arithmetic. Children with ADHD can't do arithmetic in their mind because they can't set up the problem, hold it in mind, move the pieces around on their mental blackboard in order to do it correctly, right? It's just not going to happen, right? But they could do it externally. We could give them marbles or other things like poker chips and tokens, and they could use them to count. So they can add, they can subtract, bring them together, split them into groups. We could give them a number line, as we use in school, so that they can count going forward and back on the number line. They're going to need a physical tool outside of them to help them to manually solve the problem. And then, of course, we still need to work on ways to improve their emotion, because we haven't yet discovered things to do to help them with emotional control. But we're working on that. And one of the things that we can do is to think of our behavior, our emotions, as occurring in these 5 stages, right? We select into a situation, something happens in the situation to provoke emotion, we attend to that, and then we think about it and appraise it, and then we have an emotional response. This just takes a matter of milliseconds, tenths of seconds for all of this to play out. But it helps to think of it in its 5 stages, because we can intervene in each of those sequences in order to try to change the emotional response in the situation. In fact, this model works for trying to change any behavior, anywhere, in anyone. It isn't just for emotion. But we might be able to help children control their emotion, first of all, by getting them to think about, where are you likely to get upset? Maybe you shouldn't go there. Or if you have to go there, how could we change that situation, so that we can modify it so you're not likely to get upset? Can I alter the situation in some way? If I can't, and you find yourself in a situation that's provoking emotion, don't look at it. Redeploy your attention somewhere else. Daydream. Let your mind wander. Look away. Cover your eyes so that the provocation goes away and you can try to recover your emotion. Then I can teach you to think about the emotion. Talk to yourself. Calm yourself down. Tell you it's not that important. I can get you to reappraise your thoughts about the emotion. And we know that by changing our thoughts, we can change our emotions. This is what cognitive behavioral therapy does in psychology. It teaches people to change the way they talk about their feelings in order to change their feelings. Lastly, we could, of course, try to get them to simply suppress the emotion. That's not going to happen. That's very hard to do. But it's possible. And sometimes using medication, that's what we do, is to try to suppress the emotion with a medicine. So we're working on ways to look at all 5 stages of an emotion and what we could do at each stage to try to improve an emotion. And I'm sure you can come up with some things to do as well. Finally, and then we'll wrap up this presentation, I talked about the executive system being a fuel tank, a limited pool of energy, of resources that you can use for self-regulation, for executive functioning, for goal-directed, task-oriented behavior. Now, what can we do if we've depleted the executive fuel tank? What can we do to help refuel it? Well, research shows that by adding in more rewards and getting children to talk positively about the task and how they feel about it, you can start to add fuel to the tank. And also by having them make statements about how effective they can be. I can do this. I know I can. It's not that much work. It's only a few problems. I know I've got this. Statements of self-efficacy, effectiveness, can also add fuel to the tank. Just like a coach does with a sports team before they have to go out and play their opponents. He gives them a pep talk, a motivational talk. You can do that to a child. They can do it to themselves. If they have a lot of work to do, then taking frequent breaks during the work to stand up, stretch, stop thinking, stop using your executive brain, move around, even just mind wander and meditate can also help to fuel and refuel the executive brain. Sometimes just taking 3 minutes out to relax, close your eyes, maybe meditate a little bit, but otherwise stop your thinking, let your mind wander, can help to add fuel. Visualizing the goal, the task, and getting to the end of the goal helps you to visualize the rewards and talk about them. And we know that visual imagery like that can help motivate you to stay with the task. Here's something. Physical exercise done on a daily basis, such as aerobic exercise and sports, helps people to add fuel to their tank and expand their fuel tank. So routine exercise should be part of every ADHD child's day. And then finally, we have learned that the front part of the brain runs on blood sugar, blood glucose. So if a child has to sustain their actions for a long time using their executive brain, it helps for them to have a beverage that has a little bit of sugar in it. Over here, it might be a sports drink like Gatorade or Powerade. It might be sweet iced tea or lemonade, something they can drink and just sip on to keep their blood sugar up so that the executive brain has enough glucose to continue to function as well as it can. So I hope in this lecture you've learned that ADHD is not an attention disorder. It's a disorder that disrupts inhibition and the brain's executive functions. It disrupts this internalizing of actions to the self for self-regulation, and that leads to a disorder of self-control. So if a disorder of self-control is what ADHD is, then what we have is a problem with directing behavior toward the future, a form of future or time blindness. And it disrupts the child's ability to organize behavior over time in order to accomplish their goals. It interrupts the 5 major executive abilities as they occur in daily life. So that people with ADHD can't string together long chains of actions to accomplish goals. And we've explained why that is the case. So it is a serious and pervasive disorder of executive functioning and self-regulation that's going to interfere with all of the major domains of life that require self-control, such as reciprocity, keeping promises, cooperating with others, accomplishing work at home and in school, following through on our promises and commitments that we make to others, and so on. ADHD is going to produce a devastating effect on most major life activities. And it's going to prevent you from dealing with your long-term goals and welfare. But this view of ADHD tells us how to help. That by being a disorder of executive functioning, we can help ADHD children by adding things into the normal environment at the point of performance to help them show what they know, and also by adding biological agents, ADHD medications, into our treatment program in order to help change the biological basis of the disorder. So while I've said that ADHD is a very impairing disorder that children have that persists in most cases into adulthood, it's also one of the most treatable disorders in psychiatry, having many, many treatments that can be used to help improve these executive deficits so that the child can lead a normal, effective, and satisfying and happy life. Thank you for joining me today for this program. I hope that you've learned something from the program, and I hope that you'll tune in to other lectures that I may have on video. Thank you so much.